Under which of the following economic conditions would the inventory value used using the first in, first out method most likely exceed the inventory value using the last in, first out method? So we've got stagflation, recession, or deflation. So one way we can rule this out is under a recession, we're likely going to be seeing some type of deflation or disinflation, which is going to correspond with answer C, which would lead us to rule these out since they're similar or the same and go with answer A. But conceptually, let's walk through this. So under stagflation, we're going to have increasing inflation, so prices are going to be going up. So if prices are going to be going up over time, under the first in, first out method, values that we bought down here are going to be sold off first, and then we're going to be holding this inventory at the end of the period. So our inventory value is going to be based on these higher valued units that we bought. Under a recession or deflation, if prices are falling, first in, first out, we're going to be buying here and then selling from down here. And then holding these values, so it would be lower. And the way this works out compared to last in, first out, these are just going to be flipped. So under last in, first out, you sold these units and then you're holding down here. So this inventory value is going to be greater than this one. And then opposite for here. So under a recession or deflation, you'd expect last in, first out to have a higher inventory value. Answer A. Which of the following statements regarding inventory valuation are most likely accurate? So we've got statements 1, 2, and 3, and we need to understand which of these are accurate between 1 and 3, 1, 2, and 3, or 1, 2, and 3. So we've got 1, inventory costs should usually be capitalized. That's going to be accurate. And we can also see that 1 is included in all these, so that makes sense that this one is accurate. 2, IFRS and US GAAP both allow weighted average cost method of inventory. That's also going to be correct. And for 3, US GAAP does not permit the use of last in, first out LIFO method of inventory. That's not going to be accurate. US GAAP does allow this. IFRS is the standards that do not allow LIFO. So we can rule out A for 1 and 3, and we can rule out C for 1, 2, and 3, and go with answer B. Statements 1 and 2 are accurate. Which of the following is most accurate representation of the net operating cycle? Is it going to be A, days of inventory on hand plus days of sales outstanding, B, days of sales outstanding minus number of days payable, or is it going to be C, days of inventory on hand plus days of sales outstanding minus number of days payable? We're going to go with C since this is going to be most comprehensive. It's including all of these, and this is essentially telling us how long does it take for us to make a sale and then convert that to cash. Answer C. What condition of the fraud triangle would you most likely associate the following statement with? I need to exceed investors' expectations to ensure stock prices increase. We've got A, incentive, B, opportunity, or C, attitude or rationalization. So between these three, attitude or rationalization, we would need more information to pick this. If we're rationalizing something, we would need to know what immoral or possibly unethical thing they're doing that they are rationalizing. It doesn't say anything about it. They're just saying that they need to exceed investor expectations. But it doesn't give anything that they're doing immorally that would, or tell us what fraud they're doing that they're rationalizing. B, opportunity. Again, we would need more information. It doesn't tell us whether there was any opportunity for fraud or something. I think a common example that is used for this is that the board is not independent. So because the board is made up of all executives, there's potentially an opportunity there with limited oversight to do some weird things with accounting that you probably shouldn't do. So this one is going to be A, incentive. There's probably a reason that we want the stock price to increase, and that's kind of the incentive there. Answer A. Calculate the percentage that will be represented by shareholders' equity on a vertical common size balance sheet based on the following information. We've got liabilities of the company and shareholders' equity. So a common size balance sheet is going to be done as a percentage of assets. So the first thing we need to do is calculate the total assets, which is going to be equal to our liabilities plus equity. So total assets gives us 65. And then we're going to be common sizing our shareholders' equity. So this will just be 25 divided by that total assets number of 65, gives us 0.3846. And if we round that, we'll be closest to A. J Limited is a cosmetic manufacturer. An excerpt of its income statement during 2019 is given in the table below. We've got revenue, cash collected, returns of goods sold, and cost of goods sold. Given that the company uses the accrual basis of accounting, the net revenue recognized for the 2019 income statement is closest to. So for accrual basis of accounting, a couple things we don't need to pay attention for to calculate this. We don't need to pay attention to cash collected, since accrual is going to be just based on the when revenue is recognized. And then cost of goods sold is also thrown in there to throw you off. We're not going to be using that either. So to calculate our net revenue, it's simply just going to be these two numbers, 2 million in revenue minus the returns of previous revenue or goods sold, gives us net revenue of 1.8 million. Answer A. A newly incorporated construction company reported revenue of 690,000, cost of goods sold of 550,000, and operating expenses of 210,000. Assuming a tax rate of 25%, the firm should most likely report A. Deferred tax assets of 17,500, deferred tax assets of 70,000, or C, deferred tax liabilities of 70,000. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to calculate our operating profit here. So we're going to take revenue, subtract out cost of goods sold and our operating expenses, and we see that gets us to a negative number. So that gets us to negative 70. So we know right there we're not going to have deferred tax liability, since when you're at a loss, you do not have to pay taxes on your loss. So then our deferred tax asset, which is essentially deferring this loss to the future that we can use to offset future gains, which will lead to taxes. We're going to take 25% of this and multiply that to get 17,500. This is tax that we can use to offset future tax in the future. Answer A. Biotech Solutions Limited had a weighted average of 60,000 shares of common stock outstanding for the year ended 31st December 2016. At the beginning of the year, the company has outstanding 10,000 options with an exercise price of USD 125. During the fiscal year, the company's market price has averaged USD 200 per share. The company reported a net income of USD 1.5 million and declared and paid preferred dividends of 200,000 for the fiscal year. No other potentially dilutive financial instruments are outstanding. Biotech's diluted EPS is closest to. All right, we're going to be using the Treasury stock method here. Let me pull in all the steps we're going to walk through. So a few key things here. Options outstanding, 10,000. Exercise price, 125. And then average market price is 200. So we're going to be repurchasing these shares, which will be the 10,000 options. So, sorry, just to backtrack a little bit. Our market price is above the exercise price, so these are going to get exercised, which will be dilutive. So these are getting repurchased, which means incremental new shares. We're repurchasing 10,000, and then we're subtracting out. We had 10,000 issued, but we're repurchasing the 6250 back, which means that there's going to be incremental new shares of 3750. So this 3750 is going to get added to this number here. For our numerator, we have net income, and then we're subtracting out the preferred dividends that had already been paid. And then we're dividing that from our new share count. So we get diluted EPS of 20.3922. And if we round that, that'll be closest to answer B. Emily, a seasoned financial analyst, has been analyzing the financial statements of Retail Corp, a company known for its expansive chain of retail stores. For years, Retail Corp's financial performance has been stable, prompting Emily to predict similar stability in the future. However, recent market trends indicate a significant shift toward online shopping, a domain where Retail Corp has limited presence. Despite these trends and reports forecasting a decline in traditional revenue, Emily continues to project stability in Retail Corp's financial performance, basing her forecasts on the company's historical financial stability and her extensive experience in analyzing similar companies. Which of the following biases is Emily most likely exhibiting in her analysis? Is it A, conservatism bias, B, illusion of control bias, or C, representativeness bias? So the key here is we're basing our forecasts on the historicals, and we're not taking into account these new recent market trends, especially online shopping where we have limited presence here. So we're slow to update our forecast. This is going to be a conservatism bias where investors are cautious to update based on new information and they're relying too much heavily on past info. For illusion of control bias, there would have to be something in here talking about how Emily thinks that because she has such a good familiarity with the company that she can predict better for some reason, or that she has some control over the outcome, where that's obviously not the case for a publicly traded company. And C, representativeness bias. This is more so based on somebody's past experience and how they have experienced things and then them projecting that onto what they think is going to happen. This is more so based on the historical trends and information out of the company, not necessarily Emily's personal experience. Answer A. The auditors were not provided with the supporting documents for the majority of the transactions, including material transactions selected for the audit. Which type of audit opinion should most likely be issued in such case? Is it an adverse opinion, a qualified opinion, or a disclaimer of opinion? So the key here is we don't have supporting documents for the majority of the transactions. So in this case, we should be going with a disclaimer of opinion. And when we're doing a disclaimer of opinion, we're basically saying that we can't give an opinion based on these financial statements, which we shouldn't be doing if we don't have a majority of the transactions, especially material transactions. Adverse opinion is when we're going to say that the financial statements are not presented fairly. And then a qualified opinion is when they are saying that it's mostly going to be that most of the financial statements were presented fairly, but not fully. But in this case, when we don't have enough transactions, we would lean towards disclaimer, not qualified. Answer C.